If I've learned anything during my 10 years of walking with the Lord, it's this: God desires intimacy. I remember sitting in my dorm room as a college freshman at UCF, and this presence began to fill my room, and I had never experienced anything like that before. And I just began crying like a little baby under the weight of this presence in my dorm room. And I remember just saying, sorry, God. Sorry for the life I was living. But in the moment, I didn't feel condemnation. I didn't feel His judgment. I felt His love and His closeness in that moment as I was experiencing God. And not soon after that, I began to do the church thing. I began to pursue this Jesus with my whole heart. But I began to fall in the trap that many people fall into as they pursue the Lord for the first time. I was so obsessed with purity, with holiness, with trying to work my way to God, to try and not fall and sin against Him. And it led me down a road of works, of striving, of being critical to others, because I was trying so hard. I remember being in my kitchen feeling that the Lord wanted me to fast. And I became frustrated. I told the Lord, have it all. Take it. All my joy, all my pleasure in life, just take it. I was frustrated at God because I had given Him everything else. All the sin, all the evil I used to do, I gave it up for Him. And my last pleasure in life was food. Now the Lord wanted me to give that to Him. But the Lord wasn't trying to take away my joy. He wasn't trying to take away my pleasure. He was trying to get my attention. That He had to be my everything. My passion, my love, my joy. Not what I could do for Him. Not my sacrifices. Not my labor. But God had to be my all in all. Anything else could be taken away from me, but not Him. True intimacy is nearness to God, closeness with your Father, where you can feel His heartbeat in your life. There are no words that can describe intimacy with God. And years later, after my experience with Him, I had another experience with God. Except this time it didn't last a few hours. It lasted for several days. I was cleaning up one evening, and I began to feel such a wave of revelation flood into my life. And it only increased to the point where I felt like my very being was vibrating with God. I could barely sleep that night because all I could feel was the amazing presence of God. I was saturated with heaven. I remember just crying throughout the day, just filled with joy and filled with emotion for life and for Jesus. At times I felt like it was so intense I couldn't take any more. And probably the first time in my walk with the Lord, I was not wanting any more of God's presence because it was so much. It was so glorious. During that time, I really experienced the intimacy of the Lord. I was experiencing the nearness that God wants with His children. At times, the only thing I could say to God was, Daddy, Daddy. Something that I felt uncomfortable saying before. But in this moment of being so near to the heart of God, all I could say All that I could call him was what a child may say to their dad. Daddy. It's not like God is closer to you in certain moments than others. It's not like he's here for a little bit and then he leaves us. God has always been close to me, even when I was doing those things that were wrong. God was always right by my side, closer than my breath, nearer than my heartbeat. God was there the entire time. It was in those moments when, by his grace, my heart opened up to him, when I was able to realize how close God was to me, how near the Father was to me. Intimacy with God is not as complicated as we make it. Love is very simple, but for some reason, we humans convolute the whole process of love and intimacy. My time with him looks very different than before, because now when I'm with him, I barely say anything. I barely open my mouth. I just sit before him and quiet myself and try my best to look at him. Because as my relationship with God has grown, I've realized that he already knows what we're about to say. He already knows our prayer. And what he really wants from us is to just look at him, to gaze at him with the eyes of our heart, to look into his eyes as he looks into our eyes. And as I sit there doing this with the Lord, every time I feel these waves of glory. I feel as if wind is blowing on my back. I begin to experience his reality, that he is right here, that he is right by my side. And as I just sink into this reality of God, everything becomes a lot more easy. He becomes the priority. He becomes the reason I exist. And intimacy with him just follows. When we acknowledge him in the room, when we acknowledge him by our side, when we take our eyes off the other things and look at Jesus. You see, you don't need to work yourself up to God. You don't need to strive to enter into his presence. What you need to realize is God is already there. And what God wants more than anything is your attention, your focus, where you are able to tune everything else out and focus on the divine, focus on the eternal one, to focus on God with your heart and your soul. As you do that, intimacy with God will become commonplace. Nearness to him will only increase, because you will not be experiencing simply religion, but you'll be experiencing God himself.